All right, shalom, shalom, Israel. We're gonna go ahead and get started. We're gonna hop right into it. For those that was on with me previously for History in the AM, we covered the Assyrian captivity, basically from the time Assyrian overthrew us and we went into captivity. First, let me see. Can everybody hear me? Just type Y in the chat if you can. If you can hear me. Um, do. Okay, cool. All praises. All right. So, for those that have been in tune with History in the AM, we've been covering a lot of different various history throughout the Bible. Last time I was on, we covered the Assyrian captivity. You can go back and watch those videos just to get up to speed with where we're at now. But essentially, we started from the time we went into Assyria um, with Teflath-Pileser and Shalmaneser, all the way up until the time we've went into Babylon. So, uh, just to recap where we were at, and like I said, to get up to speed, go back and watch part 1 and part 2 of the Assyrian captivity. But just to recap real quick, let's go to Second Kings. Second Kings chapter 23. Second Kings chapter 23 and verse 21. And it reads, no, I'm not going to start at 21. I'm going to start at verse 29. So at this point where we're at in history, because essentially what we're doing, just so everybody understands with these captivities, we're going through the captivities in history, but filling in the blanks of everything in between. So, like I stated just a second ago, we started with when Assyria overthrew us. Then, throughout history, went all the way up to the time that we went into Babylon and everything in between. Now, we're going to go from Babylon, us going into captivity with Babylon, everything that took place, all the things that happened, all the way up till Persia and Mede, and everything in between. So, 2 Kings 23 and 29. It says, in his days, Pharaoh Nechoh, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him, and he slew him at Megiddo when he had seen him. So, at this point in history, you had Josiah, who was the king, who was a righteous king over the house of Judah. Because remember, the northern kingdom, they've been overthrown. They were taken into captivity by Shalmaneser. They've been in Nineveh, and Judah was left in the land, like you read in Hosea. Um, and Hezekiah was the king. Then he was a righteous king. Then Manasseh was king after him, but he repented, but he was the devil. The Bible speaks of. He was one of the most wickedest kings that we have seen, and he did greater than the nations that the Lord put out before us. But he did repent. But even with that, he caused Israel to sin. Then you had Josiah reign after him, which came through and set things. No matter of fact, you had one more. Who was it? He had a short reign. Amnon. You had Ammon, who didn't reign very long after Manasseh, because he did the same as Manasseh wickedly, did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the people of the land basically conspired against him and killed him. Then Josiah reigned after him in Judah, and he was a righteous king. And as you read, there was no king like him that feared God and turned to the Lord. and he had one of the most epic Passovers to date. So where we're at in 2 Kings 23 and 29 was when Josiah died. I'm gonna read verse 29 again. It says, "In the days of Pharaoh, Nechoth, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him and slew him at Megiddo when he had seen him." Now, when you read in Chronicles, which I won't read it now, go back and watch the other videos. Basically, Josiah, the Lord was orchestrating Nechoth, or Pharaoh Nechoth. When you read in Chronicles, it says Nechoth, basically to go up to this battle. And the battle that you look at in history is the Battle of Carchemish. Whenever you do your research, there was a few other nations that was there. You had Babylon, Assyria, you had the Persian and Medes, as well as the Egyptians, all had this battle that was taking place in here, and that's where the king of Egypt was headed to. But Josiah met him in Megiddo and slew him. The king of Egypt told Josiah, "Do not interfere, because God is sending me here. I ain't got no quarrel with you." But Josiah decided to go against him, and the king of Egypt killed him. So he was buried, taken back, and buried with his fathers. Then Eliakim, his son, reigned in his stead. So northern kingdoms in Assyria, they're in captivity, and the kingdom of Judah, southern kingdom, is now under Eliakim, the son of Josiah. So now let's hop into Babylon. Just to recap, just to see where we're at in history. Northern kingdoms in captivity, southern kingdom still in the land, but they're under Eliakim, son of Josiah. Matter of fact, I'm gonna jump down to verse 34, 2 Kings 23, verse 34. It says, and matter of fact, 33. It says, "And Pharaoh Nechoth put him in bands at Riblah," talking about Eliakim. Yes. No. Verse 31. It says, "And Jehoaz was 20 and 3 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutha, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. And Pharaoh Nechoth put him in bands in Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem." So the next person to raise up was Jehoaz, but Pharaoh Nechoth came and basically put him in bands, captured him, and took him into captivity into Egypt, and he didn't reign. That's why he only reigned 3 months. Um, where we at, verse 33, "And put the land to a tribute of 100 talents of silver and of gold." Then Pharaoh Nechoth put tribute meaning taxes. He taxed the land, 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Verse 34. "And Pharaoh Nechoth made Eliakim the son of Josiah king in the room of Josiah his father." So basically, Jehoaz's brother was set up, which was Eliakim, whose name was changed as we read. Matter of fact, verse 34 again. "And Pharaoh Nechoth made Eliakim the son of Josiah king in the room of Josiah his father, and turned his name to Jehoiakim, and took Jehoaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there." So Jehoaz died in Egypt, and now Eliakim, whose name was changed to Jehoiakim, is now king in his stead. Keep in mind with these names, because you're going to see another name where it seems similar, but it's different. You had a Jehoiakim and then a Jehoiachin. These are two different people. So now, Jehoiakim is being raised up. Matter of fact, verse 35, "And Jehoiakim gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give the money according to the commandment of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and the gold of the people of the land, of everyone according to his taxation, to give unto Pharaoh Nechoth. Jehoiakim was 20 and 5 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zebudah, the daughter of Pedaiah of Ramah, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. So Jehoiakim was set up, and he reigned for 11 years. And I said this last time I was on. When you're reading the scriptures, a lot of times we look at when we read these chapters, when you're doing your 4 chapters a day, when you're reading, don't think that it's boom, boom, everything's boom, 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 boom. Like it's happening one after the other. A lot of time there's a lot of time in between a lot of these events take place. Like right here, we're gonna go from chapter 23 to 24, where Babylon's coming against us. But when we just read here in verse 36, it says Jehoiakim was 20 and 5 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. So from the time that Pharaoh Necho came up against, because that's what any king would do. Josiah went against him. He killed him, and then he came and pursued Jerusalem, and of course Jehoaz did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Matter of fact, I'm gonna go to Judith real quick, because whenever we sin against God, for those that's new, whenever we sin against God, these other nations know this. These heathens, they know this. So this is Judith 5:20. It says, "Now therefore, my Lord and governor, if there be any error in this people, and they sinned against their God, let us consider that this shall be their ruin, and let us go up, and we shall overcome them. But if there be no iniquity in their nation, let my Lord now pass by, lest their Lord defend them, and their God before them, and we become a reproach before all the world." So these other nations know this. So here, Pharaoh Necho, Josiah is killed in battle. His son is raised up. He did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Pharaoh Necho was able to come against him and basically take him to Egypt and kill him there, and then set up Eliakim, whose name was changed to Jehoiakim, and he did that which was evil in the sight. And he reigned 11 years. So there was 11 more years from the time that Pharaoh Necho basically taxed the land, basically took the land captive in a sense, meaning we were still in the land. It would be similar to what took place during the time of Rome, where you had the scribes and Pharisees set up by Rome. You had certain governors that was put in place by Rome, and we were in the land, and they taxed the land and things of that nature. That's why you read in, I believe it's Luke 2, where it talks about they were going to. Matter of fact, let me get it. Luke 2, yeah, Luke 2 and verse 1. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Assyria. And all went to be taxed, everyone in his own city. That's the same thing we're reading here in 2 Kings 23, which Pharaoh Necho put on the land in Jerusalem. They taxed the people that, or gave tribute to the people, and that took place for 11 years. So the point is, there's always a lot of times when you're reading these scriptures, a lot of time took place from one event to the other. It wasn't just one event happened. I know when you're reading it like that, but a lot of times pay attention to the details, because there's a lot of time that goes by or takes place in between certain events. So now let's get into Babylon. First I want to start at where do we want to start? Babylon's going to be longer history because a lot took place during the time of Babylon. But first let's go to Genesis 10. Genesis 10. Genesis 10. And we're going to start at verse 8. Just quick history on the Babylonian people. Genesis chapter 10. I will start at verse 6. It says, "And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan, and the sons of Cush, Shabbat, and Havilah, and Sabtha, and Rahamah, and Zabtakah, and the sons of Rahamah, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begat Nimron, and began to be a mighty one in the earth. And he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, this mighty hunter means he was a hunter of men's souls. He was a mighty hunter, meaning a hunter of men's souls. Similar to someone else on the earth, who is called the daughter of Babylon, Esau. So now, verse 10, it says, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erketh, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So right here, you're reading the birth of the Babylonian people, or the Cushites, which would be modern day Ethiopians today. And that land of Shinar would be what we would call modern day Iraq. That's that area. That's that area or region today. So now let's get into it. Let's go to 2 Kings 24. Back to 2 Kings real quick, verse 24. So those are the Babylonian people. They would be modern day Ethiopians, and they're the land of Shinar, which was uh, their dwelling place, their land would be modern day Iraq. So now this captivity was roughly between 605 BC, and once again, these dates are approximate. They're not exact dates. It's an approximate uh, between 605 BC up until about 539-ish BC. So, because remember, we were in Babylon about 70 years. So think of when we went into captivity, it was 70 years, and that's why these dates are approximate. You might look these dates up; they're approximate. We were in Babylon for 70 years, and we'll read that as we go on. So, 2 Kings chapter 24. We're going to start at verse 1. So, Jehoiakim is king in the southern kingdom. His name was Eliakim. It was changed to Jehoiakim. Uh, he's reigned for roughly 11 years up until this point where we're about to read in 2 Kings 24. Keep in mind, Northern Kingdom's in captivity under under the Assyrians. They're in Nineveh and scattered throughout. You have some remnant still in the northern kingdom of Israel, but primarily the other nations are in the Northern Kingdom because they were put there by the king of Assyria whenever that second wave with Shalmaneser came and took all of Northern Kingdom, and then they put heathens in the land. All right. So 2 Kings 24, verse 1. And it reads, in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. So Nebuchadnezzar came up, and he was his servant for 3 years. So when you do the math and kind of to give you approximate dates, it was around the what is that? The 8th year of Jehoiakim's reign, whenever Nebuchadnezzar came up against him. Now, in the background, keep in mind Nebuchadnezzar was going through and overthrowing nations. That's what we read back in 2 Kings 23. Matter of fact, I want to get it in Chronicles real quick. Where we was talking about Pharaoh Nechoff and God was sending him. There was a big battle. And basically Babylon engulfed Assyria with the help of the Persian and Medes. The Egyptians were right there battling as well in these different battles. Matter of fact, just go back and watch it because we read it in Second Chronicles, the Battle of Carchemish and certain things of that nature. So 24:1 again, it says, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Meaning what? Nebuchadnezzar overthrew. This is where you got to pay attention to read the details of what's happening, because Jehoiakim was whose servant prior to Nebuchadnezzar? Pharaoh Necho. Remember, he came and he was Pharaoh Necho set him up, and basically he was that person that was set up as similar to how the scribes and Pharisees was set up, and basically made the land pay tribute to Pharaoh Necho. Nebuchadnezzar came through, has overthrown Egypt, and now Jehoiakim is Nebuchadnezzar's servant. And this happened for 3 years. Verse 1 again. In the days of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, meaning Jehoiakim turned and rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 2, and the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Assyrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants, the prophets. So, this is what you're reading, where we are basically the southern kingdom are beginning to be destroyed and are going to be taken into captivity, which he spake by his servants, the prophets. Watch this. Just to recap, let's go back to 2 Kings 20 real quick, just to read where we read that. And you can read it throughout Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, many of the prophets prophesied us going into captivity in Babylon, and some of that is twofold even up until today. But primarily where we read it in the history in Kings is 2 Kings 20 and verse 15. 2 Kings 20 and verse 15, it says, and he said, what have they seen in thy house? This is Isaiah that's speaking, the prophet Isaiah. Verse 15, and he said, what have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, all the things that are in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed thee. And Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come, that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day shall be carried into Babylon, nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Verse 19, then said Hezekiah unto Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. And he said, it is not good if peace and truth be in my days. So now let's go back. 2 Kings 24 and verse 2 again. It says, and the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees and bands of the Assyrians. These bands means armies. He sent these armies against the king of Judah. It says, and the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Assyrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants, the prophets. Verse 3, surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did. Because remember, we read previously that basically Manasseh did so wickedly. Because remember, Josiah came in and was king, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. And there was no king before him that turned to the Lord in all his ways and all his doings. Even that, because of the sins of Manasseh, God said, y'all got to be destroyed. But it was already prophesied, what we just read in 2 Kings 20, that this would take place. All right, verse 4. 2 Kings 24, verse 4. And also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. So he filled the land with innocent blood. So now, These nations are coming up against Jerusalem. Babylon is now coming up against us, and we are basically, this is starting that first wave that is being taken into Babylon. Similar to what Assyria did. They took us in waves into Babylon. The same thing. They took us in waves under Assyria, Northern Kingdom. Under Assyria, there was two different waves that went into where they besieged us that first time, took some of us captive, and then during that besieging, we basically was brought low, and they took the rest of us into captivity. Similar as what you're gonna see here, and this is that first race. So watch this. We're gonna hold that verse 4. Let's go to Second Chronicles real quick. Second Chronicles 36. And we are going to start at verse 5. We're going to start at verse 5. And like I said before, Kings and Chronicles, you're going to read the same history. It's just Kings goes into certain details. Chronicles goes into certain details to help you paint, put the pieces together to paint the picture of historically what happened. Second Chronicles 36, and we're going to start at verse 5. And Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in feathers to carry him to Babylon. Why was he bound in feathers? Because when we read verses back in 2 Kings 24, it said he rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him all these nations, and Nebuchadnezzar bound him and carried him to Babylon. Not only did he carry him to Babylon, watch this, verse 7. Nebuchadnezzar also carried the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar bound Jehoiakim, took him took him captive to Babylon. Also, he carried the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. Watch this. Who also was taken during this time? Let's go to Daniel 1 and 1. So we read in first and Second Kings 20 where the prophecy was to Hezekiah that even his sons would go into Babylon and they would be made eunuchs. This is when Daniel was carried into Babylon during that first wave. Let's go to Daniel 1 and verse 1. Hold on, let me get it. Daniel 1 and verse 1. The book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. That's those 3 years we read about in Second Kings 24. During that time, Nebuchadnezzar besieged us. And as we read in previous classes, when they're being besieged, food supplies cut off, water is cut off, nothing's allowed in or out, and basically starvation and famine begins to happen. And that's what we read about in Deuteronomy 28, where it talks about we will eat our kids, we will eat our children. We will because of the famine and the hunger. We read certain examples during the time of Syria, prior to the Assyrians come against us, where there was hard famine, and there was a situation you read in, I believe it's 2 Kings 6, where you had two women basically fighting over. Well, she was mad at at the other woman because basically they made a pact to eat each other's sons, but they ate the one woman's son, and then the other woman skated free. That's how bad the famine was. That's the same thing you're reading here about when we're besieged, these certain things happen because food and water is cut off. So now Daniel 1 and 1, it says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried unto the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels unto the treasured house of his God. That's what we just read in Second Chronicles, where it says Nebuchadnezzar came up and carried him to Babylon, and he also carried the vessels from the house of the Lord. Verse 3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all knowledge, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and tongue of the Chaldeans. Verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. And among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and unto Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. So these four men were carried into Babylon. So this is when Daniel now was carried into Babylon during that first wave. And that's what was prophesied to Hezekiah, that his sons would be carried into Babylon, because these were men of the king's seed and of the princes. When you read verse 3, it says, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, of the king's seed, and of the princes. So now let's go back to 2 Chronicles 36 verse 7 again. Nebuchadnezzar, 2 Chronicles 36 verse 7. Nebuchadnezzar also carried the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon, and put them in his temple at Babylon. So during this time, you can write it, put a note, highlight it in your Bible. Daniel 1:1, this was when Daniel was taken into Babylon with that first wave. So now let's go back to 2 Kings 24 and verse 5. 2 Kings 24 verse 5. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his seed. So now Jehoiakim dies. He was taken captive in Babylon, dies, and Jehoiachin reigns in his stead now. He is set up in Jerusalem over the southern kingdom. Keep in mind, we're still there, but we're being besieged now. Babylon has now come against us. We are still in the land, but some of us have been taken captive. Some of us have been taken to Babylon during this first wave. So now, watch this. Let's go to Jeremiah 27 real quick. Jeremiah 27, we're going to start at verse 1. Jeremiah 27 and verse 1. In the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah, came the word unto Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Thus saith the Lord to me, make thee bonds and yokes, and put them upon thy neck, and send them to the king of Edom, to the king of Moab, and to the king of the Ammonites, and to the king of Tyrus, and to the king of Sidon, by the hand of the messengers which came to Jerusalem unto Zedekiah, king of Judah. Now, this Zedekiah right here, as we read on, was the one that was set up. He was set up after Jehoiachin had basically that second wave had been taken. But I wanted to come here just to show you what was taking place and what was told to Nebuchadnezzar. So now, verse 4. Command them to say unto their masters, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Thus shall ye say unto your masters, I have made the earth, the man and the beast that are upon the ground, by my great power and by my outstretched arm, and have given it to whom it seemeth meet unto me. And now have I given all the lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field have I given him also to serve him. Verse 7. and all nations shall serve him, and his son, and his son's sons, until the very time of his land come. And then many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of him. So this is showing you that Nebuchadnezzar, when he basically reigned and covered all nations. He reigned over all nations. And it goes back to Daniel 4 and 17, where matter of fact, let's get it. Daniel 4 and 17. Daniel 4 and 17. Daniel chapter 4, verse 17. It says, "This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basis of men." So that's what we're reading in Jeremiah, where it says the Lord is the one that gave Nebuchadnezzar all the nations on the earth, and all the nations would serve him. Same thing, you look at all these different nations that have risen up into power. God is the one who has set them in place. And it's a direct result of us breaking God's commandments. Because remember, Deuteronomy 28, let's get it, Deuteronomy the 28th chapter. Because ultimately, we were supposed to be the superpower. We were supposed to be the ruling class, and all nations were supposed to flow. And to us, we were supposed to rule over all nations. But if we broke God's commandments, this is what was commanded to us. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 43. It says, if we broke God, this is if we broke God's commandments when you read verse 15. Watch this, verse 43. "The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him, but he shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail." So these things only take place because we broke God's commandments. So guess what? The Assyrians were set up as the superpower. Granted, Southern Kingdom was still in power, but we had ups and downs because some of our kings sinned against the Lord. Now here, Babylon is being set up by the Lord. That's why when you read through Deuteronomy 28, even when you get to verse 48, it says, "The Lord shall send." Basically, our we should serve our enemies, which the Lord sent against us. So that's what we're reading. All these are everything that you read, all these nations that have been set into power, they've been set in power by God. And it's a direct result of us breaking God's commandments, even up until today. Where this demon that rules over us has been set up, and guess what? He's going to be destroyed to show God's power, like you read in Romans the 9th chapter. But we'll get to that later. So now let's go back to Jeremiah. Matter of fact, back to Second Kings. Back to Second Kings. Matter of fact, let's go to Chronicles real quick. Second Chronicles 36. So Second Chronicles 36. Like I said before, we'll be flipping between Second Kings and Second Chronicles within its history, and touching a lot of Jeremiah, Isaiah, things of that nature. Because even during the time of the prophets, it wasn't just strictly them writing prophecies and things of that nature. The scribes took down historical facts throughout their books as well. So now, Second Chronicles 36 and verse 9. Second Chronicles 36 and 9. It says, Jehoiachin was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. So just like his father, Jehoiachin, no, not Jehoiachin, Jehoiakim, just like his father Jehoiakim, he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. And verse 10, "And when the year was expired, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylon with the goodly vessels of the house of the Lord, and made Zedekiah his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem." This is that Zedekiah we just read in Jeremiah, where the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah during the reign of Zedekiah. And Zedekiah was set up by Nebuchadnezzar. Similar in the way that Jehoiakim was set up by Pharaoh Nechoff whenever Jehoaz was taken captive and killed in Egypt, and then the king of Egypt set up Jehoiakim, whose name was Eliakim, and it was changed to Jehoiakim. Zedekiah was set up the same way by Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 10 again. Matter of fact, verse 9 again. It says, and Jehoiachin was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Watch that. Let's jump to 2 Kings real quick. So Jehoiachin is set up, and he was reigning, and then he only reigned 3 months. He said he reigned for 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. This is why he only reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. Let's get the history. Let's go to 2 Kings 24, verse 8 and 9. 2 Kings 24 and verse 8. It says, Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of uh, uh, Elnathan of Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Now, here you read 18 Chronicles, you read 8, similar to what we read about Josiah. And all that is when you read in Galatians 4, where it talks about the servant, though he be Lord, he's under tutors and governors till the time appointed, though he be Lord over all. During this time, you had a lot. Remember, his father was taken captive for 3 years. He was in Jerusalem. Jehoiachin at that time would have been the one that came and reigned in his stead when it was time. He became king, but he only reigned for 3 months because of Nebuchadnezzar. We were besieged, and now Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes him captive. So now, where were we at? Verse 9. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. That's what we just read in Chronicles. Verse 10. And at that time, servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And his servants did besiege it. Where was I at? Lost my place. Verse 12 again. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out. Matter of fact, yeah, verse 12. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother, and his servants, and his princes, and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord. So it says in the 8th year of the king of Babylon's reign, Jehoiachin was taken. Verse 13, and he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon the king of Israel had made in the house, in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. So now Jehoiachin is taken captive into Babylon, as well as his mother, his servants, his princes, and his officers. And the Nebuchadnezzar went into and took all the vessels of gold which Solomon the king had made in the temple. Basically, they went through the temple and took all the vessels of gold that Solomon had set up and carried all of this into Babylon. Now, watch this real quick. Let's go to Jeremiah 37 and verse 1. Reason being is you read about Jehoiakim, how his name was Eliakim and it was changed to Jehoiakim, but we don't read where Jehoiachin, where what his name was and what it was changed to. So now let's go to Jeremiah 37 real quick, because you'll read through Jeremiah, you'll read in different places in Isaiah, primarily Jeremiah. You'll read what his name was before it was changed to Jehoiachin. So let's get that. Jeremiah 37, verse 1. It says, and King Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, reigned instead of Coniah, the son of Jehoiakim. This Coniah, or Jeconiah, which we'll read in Jeremiah 29, you'll read it in two different ways. You'll read Coniah, which is short for Jeconiah. That was Jehoiachin's name. His name was Jeconiah, and it was changed to Jehoiachin. Let's get Jeremiah 29 real quick. Jeremiah 29 and verse 2. It says, after that, Jeconiah, the king, and the queen, and the eunuchs, and the princes of Judah and Jerusalem, and the carpenters and the smiths were departed from Jerusalem. That's what we just read in 2 Kings, where it says his mother came out, his servants, his princes, they were all carried into Babylon. That's what it's saying here in Jeremiah, where it says they departed from Jerusalem. The king of Babylon took them to Babylon. So we went here to show you that Jehoiachin's name was Jeconiah, or Coniah for short, and it was changed to Jehoiachin by the king of Babylon. So now, let's go back to let's go back to Chronicles. Second Chronicles 36 and where we left off. Second Chronicles 36 and verse 9 again. Second Chronicles 36 and verse 9. Jehoiachin, whose name was Jeconiah, or Coniah for short, was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Verse 10. And when the year was expired, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylon with the goodly vessels of the house of the Lord, and made Zedekiah his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem. So that's what we just read in Chronicles, where it said his mother came out, his servants came out. We also read it in Jeremiah 29 and 2, and where his mother, servants, the eunuchs, came out. They were carried to Babylon, as well as all the vessels that Solomon had set up in the temple were carried into Babylon. Matter of fact, let's go back to 2 Kings. And the reason why I'm jumping back and forth is to show you the history that takes place between Kings and Chronicles. Because just in verse 10, it's brief. It's very brief. But when you go to Kings, it goes into a little more detail of basically Nebuchadnezzar bringing him into Babylon and the goodly vessels of the house of the Lord. So let's go back to 2 Kings 24, verse 10 again. It says, at that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his princes and his officers, and the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold, which Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained save the poor sort of the land. So essentially, Nebuchadnezzar came, besieged the land, carried everything out, went and cut the pieces of silver, basically went and cut the vessels of gold which Solomon set up in the temple, took all the goodly vessels out, took all the mighty men, took all the men of valor, took the captains, took the craftsmen, the smiths. No one remained in the land save the poor sort of the land, which we're going to come back to that. But I want to touch on the besieging. I know we touched on it in the Assyrian captivity, but now let's touch on it a little more in detail with Babylon, because we've been besieged for many years at this point. So what really took place? Let's go to Deuteronomy 28 real quick. Deuteronomy 28. Because like I said, a lot of times we read this and we just see besieged, not realizing there's a lot that took place and a lot that is happening when they're besieged, when a nation is besieged. Deuteronomy 28, and we're gonna start at verse 52. Deuteronomy 28 and 52. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates. Now, granted, what we're reading in Deuteronomy 28 is the curses that will come upon us for breaking God's commandments, like we just read. We read verse 42, where it said, no, verse 43, where it says, the stranger that is within thee will get thee very high. He shall be the head, and we shall be the tail. Now we read on in the chapter, we're reading about our enemies. These are the nations that would come against us. Verse 52, it says, and he shall besiege thee in all thy gates until thy high and fenced walls come down, wherein thou trustest, throughout all thy land. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates throughout all thy land, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. Verse 53, watch this. It says, and thou shalt eat the fruit of thy own body, and the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness wherein thine enemies shall distress thee. So that's literal. It says, thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, and the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which the Lord hath given thee. That is literal. Why would we have to do that? Because when you're besieged, like I mentioned earlier, all your resources are cut off. There's nothing coming in or out. There's no imports, there's no exports, there's no goods flowing to and from the city. And so what you have is what you have. So let's say that first month, 2 months, there might have been some that had a large stock and they were well off, they were good. So a couple months go by, you're good. But that first 6 months, that year, 2 years. Remember, it says we were besieged 3 years. That's where resources run dry, resources run out, and what do our people do? They turn to eat each other. That's why it says, "Thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body." Let's get that. Let's go to Ezekiel real quick, 5 and 10. Just a couple scriptures, um, touching on the besieging, and saying, "You shall eat the fruit of thine own body." Ezekiel 5 and 10, it says, and thy meat, Ezekiel 5 verse 10, and thy meat, no, I'm sorry, that's 4. Ezekiel 5 and 10. Therefore, the fathers shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat the fathers, and I will execute judgment in thee, and the whole remnant of thee will I scatter unto all winds. That's going into eating the fruit of thy own body. It says, the father shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers. Watch this, Jeremiah 19. Jeremiah 19 and verse 8. It says, matter of fact, I'm going to start at verse 7. And I will make void the counsel of Judah and Jerusalem in this place, and I will cause them to fall by the sword before their enemies, and by the hands of them that seek their lives, and their carcasses will I give to be meat for the fowls of the heaven and for the beasts of the earth. That's what you see taking place right now. In historically, Babylon has came up against Judah and Jerusalem, which is the southern kingdom, and we're being don't think we didn't fight back when they came against us, and our people died and we were besieged. Verse 8, and I will make this city desolate and a hissing, and everyone that passes thereby shall be astonished and hiss because of all the plagues thereof. Verse 9 is the point. And I will cause them to eat the flesh of their own sons and the flesh of their daughters, and they shall eat every one the flesh of his friend in the siege and straitness wherewith their enemies, and they that seek their lives shall straiten them. Verse 10. Then shalt thou break the bottle in the sight of the men that go before me. So that was it. Last one, Lamentations 4. Still touching on the siege and what we read in Deuteronomy, where it says, and thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body. Lamentations 4 and verse 10. And it reads, it says, Lamentations 4 and 10. The hands of the pitiful woman have sodden her own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Verse 11. The Lord hath accomplished his fury. His fury is what we're reading in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. It says the Lord hath accomplished his fury. Because what he said would happen, thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, that's happened. And that's what we're reading here, where it says the hands of the pitiful woman have sodden her own children. Why does she sodden her children? Because of the siege and the straitness. Verse 11 again. And the Lord hath accomplished his fury. He hath poured out his fierce anger, and hath kindled a fire in Zion, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof. So now, let's go back. Let's go back to 2 Kings. 2 Kings 24th chapter. 2 Kings 24. Which we won't finish all this today. There would definitely be a part 2, maybe even 3. Just gonna find a good place to stop. But let's go back to 2 Kings 24. And I'm gonna read verse 14 again. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained save the poor sort of the people of the land. So the only people that was left in Babylon was the poor of the land. We just read all the smiths, the craftsmen, the king, Jehoiachin is in Babylon. He's captive. All his servants, the eunuchs, the princes, the craftsmen, all the vessels of gold have been taken. The gold has been cut down and broken down out of the temple, and Babylon left the poor of the land still there. Watch this. Who was amongst that poor? Let's go to Bel and the dragon real quick, just to show you who was still left in the land when it says the poor sort of the land. Rebel and the dragon. And I'm going to start at verse 30. That's history. Bel and the dragon, verse 30. Verse 33. Now, the Bel and the dragon took place right during the middle to end Babylon going into Persian and Mede. But watch this. Bel and the dragon, verse 33. Now there was in Jewry a prophet called Habakkuk, who had made pottage and had broken bread in a bowl, and was going into the field for to bring it to the reapers. But the angel of the Lord said unto Habakkuk, Go, carry the dinner that thou hast unto Babylon, unto Daniel, who was in the den. So, who was still, verse 33, where it says, now there was in Jewry, meaning in Jerusalem, and still in the southern kingdom, Habakkuk. So Habakkuk was a part of that poor sort of the land that was left during the time of Babylon. So now let's go back. So Habakkuk was there, and he was left in the land whenever Babylon came and took everybody in that second wave. So now let's go back to 2 Kings 24, verse 14 again. It says, and he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained save the poor sort of the people of the land. Verse 15, and he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land, those carried he captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. Excuse me, I needed something to drink. So now watch this. Let's go to Ezekiel 1 and 1. Because when you read during the time of Babylon, many prophets were during this time, and they prophesied it to the people. Because remember, the Lord always sends his prophet out to warn the people that destruction is coming. to warn the people to turn from the wicked ways. That's what you read in Ezekiel. He was told to go and speak to the children, whether they will heal, go and speak to my people, whether they will hear or forbear. So there was many prophets during the time of Babylon. Watch this, Ezekiel 1 and verse 1. Ezekiel 1 and verse 1. It says, now it came to pass in the 12th year and in the 4th month and the 5th day of the month, I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heaven was opened and I saw a vision. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buza, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him. So Ezekiel was carried captive during this second wave of people. Remember, you had Daniel who was carried captive during Jehoiakim's reign when he was carried captive. Now, during Jehoiachin, you had Ezekiel carried. Which when you look in the Bible, you might see Ezekiel, the books of the Bible, how they're ordered. Ezekiel's book is before Daniel, but in reality, Daniel went into captivity first, then Ezekiel came later during that second wave under Jehoiachin's reign. So now let's go back to 2 Kings 24 and verse 15 again. He carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land. Those carried he into captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. Verse 16. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and craftsmen, and the smiths 1,000, all that were strong and apt for war. Even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. Verse 17. And the king of Babylon made Matania, the father's, I probably butchered that, the father's brother king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. You should see a pattern, and it all reverts back to Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter and the 37th verse. These curses that we read in Deuteronomy 28 chapter, whenever we break God's commandments, whenever we sin against God, they happen to us. And historically, you see it. You see it during the book of Judges as soon as we came out. You see it during with the northern kingdom, all the way leading up to us going into the Assyrian captivity. And now you see it even with the southern kingdom, going all the way up to us being taken out of the land and going into Babylon. You see our names were changed. You see we were being besieged. These nations rose up high against us. All these curses you see coming upon us throughout all our captivities in Persia and Mede, Greece, Rome, all the way up until today. Because every king that has been set up since Josiah, Jehoash was killed. He reigned 3 months. Then Eliakim was set up. His name was changed. Jeconiah was set up. His name was changed to Jehoiachin. Now you see Mataniah. He was set up, and his name was changed to Zedekiah. Even Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they were taken into Babylon. Their names were changed, showing you what? That the curses always come upon us whenever we break God's commandments. So now, verse 17, watch this. We just read 2 Kings 24:17. Let's go to Jeremiah real quick. Jeremiah 37. Jeremiah 37. So now, where are we at historically? Where are we at? Babylon has came against us. Jehoiakim was carried captive. We were besieged 3 years. Jehoiachin was made king in his stead. He only reigned for 3 months. Then he was carried captive along with all the vessels of all the goodly vessels that was in the temple and in the house of the Lord. The gold was cut down. Ezekiel was carried captive during that reign. Daniel was carried captive during the first wave of Jehoiakim. Habakkuk was left back in the land. He was a part of that poor sort that was left in the land. And now Zedekiah has been basically set up by Nebuchadnezzar as king, almost like basically a puppet king that was set up because he's going to do what Babylon commands him, similar to what Pharaoh Necho did with Jehoiachin. Basically set him up and had the land pay tribute, things of that nature. Because we're still in the land, it's just the poorest of sort that is there. So now let's go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 37. And matter of fact, no. I'm sorry. Jeremiah 24, not 37. Jeremiah 24. And we're going to start at verse 1. Jeremiah chapter 24, verse 1. It says, "The Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. After that, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah." Remember, Jeconiah's name was changed to Jehoiachin. So that Jehoiachin that we read in Chronicles and Kings is Jeconiah. There's another incident where his name was used. It says, had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah, and carried carpenters and smiths from Jerusalem and had brought them from Babylon. This is the same history we just read in 2 Kings as well as Chronicles. Verse 2. 1 basket had very good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe, and the other basket had very naughty figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad. Verse 3. Then said the Lord unto me, "What seest thou, Jeremiah?" And I said, "Figs, the good figs, very good, and the evil, very evil, that cannot be eaten. They are so evil." Verse 4. Again the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, "Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, who I have sent out of this place into the land of the Chaldeans for their good. For I will set my eyes upon them for good, and I will bring them again to this land, and I will build them and not pull them down, and I will plant them and not pluck them up." So the Lord gives Jeremiah basically, the Lord shows Jeremiah you have 2 baskets, 1 basket with good figs, 1 basket with evil, bad figs. And it was analogy showing that just like those good figs, God says he would, those that are good, meaning keep God's commandments, hold that. Let's get what's good. Let's go to Romans real quick so you can understand what it means to be good. Because some of y'all might think good is just mean being a nice person. I open the door for I open the door for elderly Edomite, and I'm a good person. Meanwhile, you the devil the Bible speaks of. Watch this. Let's get Romans, the 7th chapter, and we're going to read. I believe it's verse 12. Let me get it. Romans chapter 7 and verse 12. It says, "Wherefore the law is holy, the commandment holy and just and good." So when we go back to Jeremiah, that good was those that feared God and keep his commandments. And as we read, even during the time of Babylon, during captivity, when we are in captivity, those that fear God and keep his commandments, the Lord sets a hedge about them. The Lord takes care of them. Yeah, they get jacked up. Just like Daniel was brought into captivity, Ezekiel was brought into captivity. We're going to read what happened to Jeremiah during the time of Babylon. uh yeah, we were jacked up, but the Lord always took care of those that fear God and keep his commandments. Even here he's saying, though, matter of fact, Jeremiah 24 and 5 again, it says, "Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, whom I have sent out of this place into the land of the Chaldeans for their good." He says, "I will acknowledge those that were sent out into captivity for their good." And we're going to, like I said, we're going to read how the Lord has, even though all this was happening, we were being besieged, we were eating our sons and daughters, uh, we were carried captive, There's people being killed and murdered, and there was destruction. The Lord always looked out for those that fear God and keep his commandments, like we're reading here. That's what he says, I will acknowledge them for their good. Verse 6. While I will set my eyes upon them for good, and I will bring them again to this land. This is a future prophecy. So on what? Those that keep the commandments, God said he will bring them again into this land. This hasn't happened yet. How do you know it hasn't happened yet? Let's read it again. For I will set my eyes upon them for good, and I will bring them again to this land, and will build them and not pull them down, and I will plant them and not pluck them up. Meaning that right there showing you that this hasn't happened yet. Because even during the time of a Persian the Medes, yeah, we came back, we rebuilded. The Lord allowed us to come back into the land. Cyrus basically allowed us to go into the land, rebuild the temple, fortified the wall in Jerusalem. But guess what? It was plucked down again. The temple was destroyed. Remember, 70 AD, Rome came and destroyed it. So this is showing you this is for future prophecy. This is talking about when Christ returns and we get brought back into the land, and we will not be plucked out nor be broken down again. But watch this, verse 7. Verse 7. And I will give them an heart to know me, that I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return unto me with their whole heart. So it says, and I will give them a heart to know me. Meaning what? That stony heart, we're gonna get rid of that stony heart, and God's gonna give us a fleshly heart. Meaning the laws are gonna be put inside of us, like you read in Hebrews. Ain't gonna be no more us breaking God's commandments and sinning. He's gonna give us a heart to know him. And that bottom part says, and they shall return unto me with their whole heart, meaning their mind. He's going to give us a mind to know him. The laws of God are going to be written in our minds, like you read in Hebrews, the 8th chapter. But watch this, verse 8. It says, and as the evil figs, which cannot be eaten, they are so evil. Surely thus saith the Lord, so will I give Zedekiah the king of Judah, and the princes and the residue of Jerusalem that remain in this land, and them that dwell in the land of Egypt. And I will deliver them to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth for their hurt, to be a reproach and a proverb, and a taunt and a curse in all places whither I drive them. And I will send the sword, the famine, and the pestilence among them, till they be consumed from off the land that I gave them and unto them and to their fathers. So those evil figs represented what? Those wicked evil amongst us, like Zedekiah, who did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He said he's going to drive, we will become a reproach and a proverb and a curse. That curse that we will become is what you read in Deuteronomy 28 chapter. All these things would happen to us. It says, in famine and pestilence among them. That goes back to those 4 sore judgments, like Bishop brought out past previous Sabbath class, about those 4 sore judgments that will come upon, that you always read. God sends those judgments: pestilence, famine, wild beast, the sword. All this will come upon us. And as we read on, during the time of Babylon, that happened. Because right now we're just reading about us being besieged and certain things, but it gets worse as we read in Babylon. But one thing the Lord always did, he took care of those that feared God and kept his commandments. So now let's go to Second Chronicles. Let's go to Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles 36 and verse 11. So now Zedekiah is reigning as king in Jerusalem under the southern kingdom. Keep in mind, the northern kingdom, they're now under Babylon at this time. Keep in mind, the northern kingdom are now under Babylon. Matter of fact, let's get that. Let's go to Tobit real quick. Let's go to Tobit real quick. Because like we read earlier, with in Jeremiah, I believe it was. Let me look back at my notes. Jeremiah Jeremiah, I believe it was 37. Hold on, let me find it. Yeah, Jeremiah 27. I'm sorry. Jeremiah 27, where it's basically stated that Nebuchadnezzar, the Lord came unto Jeremiah and told him to make bands around his neck and send it to all the kings of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of Ammon, the king of Tyre and Zidon, and basically let him know that he's setting up Nebuchadnezzar to rule over all nations on the earth. So the Northern Kingdom was under the Assyrians. They were captive in the land of Assyria. So when Nebuchadnezzar came and subdued all nations and all nations came out of him, guess what happened to the Northern Kingdom? They went under the Babylonian captivity. So now, this is Tobit, the 14th chapter, and let's read verse. Matter of fact, I'm gonna read up a little bit. Uh, let's start. Let's start at verse 8. Let's start at verse 8. And now, my son, depart out of Nineveh, because that those things which the prophet Jonas spake surely shall come to pass. Meaning what? What did Jonas speak? That it would be destroyed. Matter of fact, let's go to it real quick. Jonah. Jonah. I'm gonna get to the point. We're not gonna read the whole. When you get a chance, go back and read the book of Jonah. I believe we read it prior. Let's go to the book of Jonah real quick. Give me 1 second. The book of Jonah. Let's start at verse. Where do I want to start? Where do I want to read? Jonah. Jonah chapter 3. Let's start at verse. I'll start at verse 4 to get to the point. Jonah chapter 3, verse 4. And Jonah began to enter into the city in the day's journey. That city was Nineveh. Day's journey. And he cried and said, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. So when we go back to Tobit, chapter 8, chapter 14, verse 8, it says, And now, my son, depart out of Nineveh, because that those things which the prophet Jonas spake shall surely come to pass. So during the time of Jonah, it didn't happen. That's why when you read on in the chapter 4, Jonah got beside himself and got mad at God because he sent him, but God showed mercy and didn't destroy the land at that time. But Tobit's letting his son know what Jonah spake, it's going to come to pass. So you need to get out of Nineveh. So watch this, verse 9. But keep thou the law and the commandments, and show thyself merciful and just, that it may go well with thee. So what is Tobit charging his son? Keep the commandments, be merciful and just, that it go well with thee. Remember, we just read in Jeremiah, what was that, 24, where it says about the good figs, that it was a representation that during this captivity, during this stuff, the Lord would basically look after those that keep the commandments. He will look upon them for good. And that's what Tobit's instructing his son right now. Leave Nineveh because they're going to be overthrown, and keep the commandments so it shall fare well with thee. Verse 10, and bury me decently, and thy mother with me, but tarry no longer at Nineveh. Remember, my son, how Haman handled Caius that brought him up, how out of light he brought him into darkness, and how he rewarded him again. Yet Achaicurus was saved, but the other had his reward, for he went down into darkness. Manasseh gave alms and escaped the snares of death, which he had set for him. But Amon fell into the snare and perished. Wherefore now, my son, consider what alms doeth, and how righteousness doeth deliver. When he had said these things, he gave up the ghost in the bed, being 150 years old, and he buried him honorably. So Tobit lived to be 158 years old. So Tobit has now died. They're still in the land of Nineveh. And I went here to show you that Northern Kingdom was in the land of Nineveh, and now they are going into Babylon. That's why Tobit told his son, hey, get up out of Nineveh because they're going to be overthrown. And he died, and Tobias buried him. Watch this, verse 12. And when Anna, his mother, was dead, he buried her with his father. But Tobias departed with his wife and children to Ecbatane, to Reguel, his father-in-law, where he became old with honor, and he buried his father and mother-in-law honorably and inherited their substance and his father Tobias. So he followed what his father told him. After his father and mother died, he buried his mother and father together. Then he left and went to Ecbatane, which was the capital of the Medes, which we're about to read. Verse 14. And he died at Ecbatane in Media, being 127 and 20 years old. So he lived to be 127 years old. Verse 15. But before he died, he heard of the destruction of Nineveh, which was taken by Nebuchadnezzar and Asuras. And before his death, he rejoiced over Nineveh. So this is showing you that before he died, he heard of the destruction of Nineveh. How Nebuchadnezzar, along with the Persian, that's why earlier I said you had the Persian and Medes were right there with the Babylonians assisting Babylon in destroying them, and that's going to play a part later on when we talk about the destruction of Babylon. So basically, Nebuchadnezzar and basically the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar and the Medes at this time. It was a Persian and Medes, but the Medes were the higher power at the time under Asuras. Basically overthrew the Assyrians, and that's what we read going back to the Battle of Carchemish, where Pharaoh Necho was going to fight as well. The king of Egypt, where King Josiah was killed, and then later on you read about these two kingdoms overthrowing the Assyrians and destroying them. So with that destruction, the northern kingdom, what happened to the northern kingdom? They went under the Babylonian captivity. They basically, when a king, think about it, when a kingdom comes and overthrows another kingdom, just like you see happening with us, where all our servants were taken, all our gold was taken, all our goodly vessels were taken, everything was taken captive to Babylon. The same thing with the Assyrians. Babylon overthrew the Assyrians. So guess what? All their servants were taken, all their goodly treasures were taken to the house of Babylon, as well as their slaves, which was the northern kingdom, were taken and are now Babylonian slaves. So now let's go back to Second Chronicles 36. So that's where Northern Kingdom is at this point. They're captive as well under the Babylonians. And many of us are now captive under Babylonian. Babylonian has besieged the southern kingdom and taken many of our goodly treasures captive. So let's go to Second Chronicles 36 and verse 11. It says Zedekiah was 120 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. Verse 12. And he did that which was evil in the sight of his God, and humbled not himself before Jeremiah the prophet, speaking from the mouth of the Lord. Because remember, we just read in Jeremiah 24 where about the good fig and the evil fig, about being an evil fig and how Zedekiah would basically be carried captive and we would be a curse and become a reproach and be scattered throughout all the nation. He didn't hearken to that which was spake by the mouth of Jeremiah, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. But what I want you to see is verse 11, where it says Zedekiah was 120 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. So Jehoiakim was taken captive. Then Jehoiachin was taken captive. Once he was taken captive and set up, Zedekiah was set up and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And then eventually he was taken captive because he rebelled against Babylon. But I think this is a good stopping point. We'll stop here and we'll get into the rest of us going into captivity in part 2. So where are we at this current time? Northern Kingdom is now under the Babylonian captivity. We just read in Tobit how Tobit died. He lived to be 157 or 8. Can't quote it off the top of my head, but 150 some odd years old he lived to be, and then he died. He instructed Tobias, his son, to leave Nineveh because what Jonah prophesied would surely come to pass, that they would be overthrown. Tobias left and went to Ecbatane, which is the capital of Media. He lived to be 127 years old. Don't quote me on that. Go back and read it. But matter of fact, let me make sure I quoted it right. It was 120. I believe it was 127. Um, yeah, he lived to be 127, and his father lived to be 100 and where's it at? 158. So Tobias is in Ecbatane, in the capital. That's where he died there. But before he died, he heard of the destruction of Nineveh that his father told him would happen, that was prophesied by Jonah. So Nineveh was overthrown, and basically, when Assyria was overthrown, all of Northern Kingdom was carried captive and were under Babylonian. Southern Kingdom, you had Jehoiachin, who was set up. Yeah, he was Nebuchadnezzar's servant for 3 years and then rebelled against him and was taken captive. And that's that first wave, along with Daniel was a part of that first wave that went into captive. Then Jehoiachin was set up as king. He reigned 3 months and I think 10. He reigned 3 months and 10 days. Then he was carried captive along with his mother, his servants, his prince, and amongst that group that was carried captive was Ezekiel. Also, the rest of the goodly vessels and everyone that was in Jerusalem, except for the poor sort, was taken captive into Babylon. Habakkuk was a part of that poor sort that was left back. And now Zedekiah was set up as king in Jerusalem. So that's where we're at in history. So we'll stop there and we'll pick up from there with Zedekiah, king in Jerusalem and Judah under the southern kingdom there. So all praises be to the Most High God. I pray y'all got some understanding of today's history in the AM. We'll pick up next time I'm on with part 2. Shalom.